Good afternoon, welcome to my channel. As the observant of you will notice, I am not in London right now. I'm back in Edinburgh, where I'm originally from, and where this whole crazy project of writing and reading stories began. And I have a story for you which is based on random words, which is the first I've done for weeks and weeks in that vein. So without further ado, the story that I'm about to read you is based on these 5 random words. And it is story number 131. And it's called Post Everything. The most remarkable thing was how quickly things fell apart. One humiliated Russian madman with his finger on the trigger, one equally humiliated Prime Minister, an American president backed into a corner, and NATO countries forced to honour their commitments in the most appalling way possible by using the nuclear armaments the West had jealously hoarded for so long. When North Korea and Pakistan joined the fray, it came with a side order of inevitability. Allegiances are formed, an empire rises, an empire falls. We went from high alert and emergency survival measures to radio silence, mass exodus and surgical ICBM strikes in a matter of 11 days. That's right, it took less than 2 weeks to unravel civilization. Never underestimate the vindictive power of the thwarted sociopathic male ego. Sophie, myself and the kids had a head start. We already lived in Ullapool, just 30 miles from Scotland's far northwest corner. Miles from anywhere, as my London-dwelling brother would have put it, had he survived the first blast. But 5 more warheads fell, and 5 more mushrooms bloomed. Manchester, Dover, Portsmouth, Devonport, and Glasgow. When Glasgow was hit, I'll admit we panicked. What if Inverness, just 30 miles to the southeast, became a target? Why Inverness? What strategic value? Sophie began, while I ransacked the cupboard for tinned goods. I don't know, dear. Wind turbines are made there, aren't they? I don't think Putin's much threatened by green energy, Dave. Sophie's a rationalist, even in the face of fiery world-ending calamity. I'm more reactive, instinctive, some might say impulsive. Let's not take the risk. We'll load the camper, head for Poland. Poland's where my grandfather hails from, a tiny village in the far northwest, so remote it isn't really on the map. The locals call it Poland, but you'll only find Poland Croft, someone's B&B business, on Google Maps. Except you won't be able to access Google Maps because there is no internet. Yes, that's right. Let that settle in for a bit. We only had television for the first 5 days of the war, if you can call it a war. More of a catastrophic skirmish, a world-ending strop. Radio lasted 9 days, then even the automated emergency broadcasts listing the safe havens, the few places outside the likely fallout zones, stopped. We're heading to Poland because it's the back of beyond, another scathing quote from my late brother Michael, a builder's merchant who would have been incinerated in seconds when London took the first strike. I haven't yet had time to process that. Grief is a luxury none of us can afford to indulge in if we mean to survive. There are several ramshackle ex-crofts in Poland which we might be able to renovate. One of the local farmers we met on our last trip said he'd probably pull them down soon. It doesn't really matter though. We have Roxy, our ancient Mazda Bongo camper van. Roxy's previous owner, who converted her from an 8-seater runabout to a camper, once drove her to Istanbul and back, living in her with his partner for 5 months. Surely she'll be a perfectly decent emergency home for us 4. That's Sophie, who owns a cafe here in Ullapool, me, a remote working copywriter for a firm making solar panels, Jenny, 8, a would-be astronomer, and Diana, 4, a promising finger painter. Okay, Roxy doesn't have a shower or even a toilet, but we have a bucket, a sponge, a pop-up shower tent and a trowel. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. We try not to let our own imaginations run wild, as Sophie and I tell our daughters there's been a disaster and that they have to stop going to school and run away, just temporarily, to the seaside. Fortunately, the girls here stop school and seaside and haven't yet asked any difficult questions. We load the van in record time, 40 minutes, on the day that Glasgow is struck. How do we find out Glasgow's been struck, you ask, without TV, radio or the internet? It turns out that CB radio hams still exist. Within 3 days, they'd created an impromptu whispering network of rumour and news. It's a little light on verifiable facts, but nobody can miss the evidence of a gigantic death blossom billowing over Clydebank. It's the 1st of May 2023, which seems painfully ironic, as we set off on the 61-mile yet 2-hour journey to the far northwest, along picturesque looping single-track roads. In an earlier age, Jeremy Clarkson and his tribe of man-boys would have raced classic cars through roads like these. Not today, however. Even this far north, the roads, well, the single road, is oddly busy as people either scurry towards the ends of the earth or rush towards cities and towns in the vague hope of rescuing loved ones. Sophie's parents, Jack and Bev, are already on the road, leaving from Exeter towards Cornwall. My parents are already safe from the horror of these days, having passed away 3 years ago, within a month of one another. Dad went first, dementia. Then Mum followed, Parkinson's and sorrow. I discover I'm glad they didn't live through this, then feel immediately guilty for having that thought. Roxy is jade green and compact, scarcely wider than a standard family saloon. Her roof pops up on hydraulics, creating a nest for the kids. Sophie and I will cram onto a 3-foot wide roll-out bed downstairs. Jenny and Diana are squealing with excitement at the trip as we creep along the A835 through the staggering beauty of the Knocken Crag Natural Nature Reserve. Past Ledmore Junction, the traffic thins. Now we only encounter a handful of fellow evacuees, or refugees, since I guess that's what we are now. 2 rangy Swedish surfers in a VW Combi look shell-shocked. They love Scotland but may never get home now. They follow us, perhaps hoping to get a little closer to Scandinavia by hopping across to Orkney or Shetland. As good an idea as any, I suppose. An Asian family on a touring holiday are arguing vehemently in a lay-by about which way to head. I suggest they follow us. One more cottage to renovate, but I can't imagine the kind folk of Poland will object. We'll form a misfit community up there, grow vegetables, wash in the icy, frothing Atlantic breakers. The Sahotas shrug, smile grimly and join our little convoy. We arrive before 6 p.m, early enough to catch the last hour of a local community meeting being held in a wind-blasted marquee attached to a dark, deserted church. There's no electricity to light up the church, and no candles, hence the marquee. It's drizzling relentlessly, and already dark. We're drawn there by the loops of bright bulbs, by the lilt of voices, and by the smell of fresh coffee. A matronly lady called Livia finds us a dozen chairs for our collective. Oddly, the coffee hails from a converted vintage Citroen van. Thomas is a Polish entrepreneur who had pitched his mobile sandwich bar and cafe on the Ullapool quayside until a day ago, when something had driven him north. I thought I recognised his vehicle. I had premonition, Thomas says, wide-eyed, as the locals discuss whether they should set up a mobile hospital for refugees in the church. They are anticipating a wave of radiation-burned, cancer-ridden escapees. I'm sceptical, but they mean well. I saw a black sunflower swaying against blue sky, Thomas continues. Enormous. I was climbing down a stem, away from giant bees which were buzzing around petals. They were on fire. I glanced towards our daughters, but they're playing with a box of toy cars, having races along the ground sheet, scurrying under chair legs with a couple of local boys. No need for them to hear this. The bees, I ask, for lack of anything sensible to add. Petals, he explains, as if this were much less ridiculous. I knew more nuclear was coming, perhaps Glasgow, perhaps Inverness. I exchange a look with Sophie. You see, it intimates. At the end of the meeting, a wiry old man rides in on a bicycle to reveal that a community centre has already been set up for refugees in nearby Old Shoremore. The Sahotas and the Ericssons will head there. I pity the poor Bradfordians in particular. They look adrift, separated from an extended family and community for whom they must fear dreadfully. The mother, Nirmal, an accountant, is still trying to get her mobile phone to work. It's on 3%, and the electricity for the marquee's festoon lights is coming directly from an oil-fired generator. No sockets, no USB ports. We could offer a charge from our van, but there's no signal, even if power could be obtained. Her Samsung might as well be a piece of black slate for skimming over the unusually glass-smooth surf. It will be dead within minutes, she says mournfully. Her choice of words hangs in the air, unadorned. We take our leave, pushing aside our Scottish reserve to hug complete strangers. Fearing for the existence of humanity will do that to even the most recalcitrant loner. We tell Livia and Thomas we don't need their kind offer of shelter. We brought our own. Livia nods as if living on a beach in a tiny camper van were the most normal thing in the world. They're a resilient sort up here at the ends of the earth. They have to be. I guess we all do now. So, another cheery little number for you. It's kind of inevitable, I suppose, for it to have that nature because the words were pretty dark. And when you have fallout and empire and fiery and poor, it's unlikely to be a very positive story. Anyway, hope you enjoyed in some measure that story. Hope it's not prophetic in any way. And I will see you again, hopefully with something a bit more cheerful very soon. Bye-bye.